everybody, it's Jason Artiga, and this is another episode of Cinema Macabro. Today's episode is an Alien Day exclusive. It's a video essay on Alien called Alien and the 5 Essential Fears That Changed Horror Forever. For many years, horror was defined by the early monsters of Universal Studios. Dracula, the werewolf, Frankenstein. They became the icons of horror, and pretty much our black and white counterparts eventually changed once color films started being produced and shown in the theaters. We started to see a more visceral versions of our monster heroes in the form of Hammer Pictures, the studio that dripped blood. Now seeing these icons like the Wolfman and Dracula, pretty much being more visceral and more violent. You started seeing Dracula more sexually charged, mainly in fact due to no Hays Code, which was a way of censoring films in the 30s and 40s, and usually changed post-war during the film noir era. We started seeing a change in films, and I would say that change started with film noir. Which pretty much all of a sudden had heroes that weren't so heroic, anti-heroes, or pretty much criminals or characters that spoke beyond the dead. Now, horror took a change in the 50s, usually with B movies. The movies of Roger Corman. Roger Corman produced cheap films that made money in the box office and targeted teenagers, but were often schlocky. I mean, we pretty much got It, the Terror from Beyond Space in 1957, which pretty much was the prototype for Alien. Yes, a man in a suit film was pretty much the film that kind of inspired Alien, and they're very similar. Once the 60s hit, and once we entered the Vietnam era, we pretty much entered a second wave of disillusionment. But this time, this disillusionment didn't just stick to film noir. It pretty much bled through every genre of film, which started to take a darker turn. Even like a cowboy movie, such as The Wild Bunch, which was rated X at the time, for violence and portraying non-heroic characters who would do anything to survive. I mean, we were entering a point where film started to take a change, and horror was pretty much part of that change. Movies such as Deliverance, Straw Dogs, The Exorcist, we started to see a little more intensity here in horror now. Now, films can show nudity or have nihilistic endings, despite audiences being used to happy endings. In 1969, Roman Polanski directed Rosemary's Baby, and that film alone has one of the most nihilistic endings ever in horror. In 1973, The Exorcist was released, and it scared the shit out of a lot of people. There was a lot of people who weren't accustomed to seeing a lot of the things that were in The Exorcist. One half is a psychological thriller where we see this young girl go through this like horrible situation in the hospital to see what is wrong with her. Those scenes alone were absolutely scary and alien to us, being that we've never seen that before in a horror film. The second half, dealing with good and evil and devils and demons, was the most scariest thing audience goers have been through. They never seen a woman even throw up on somebody in a film before. The Exorcist was pretty much the pinnacle of horror movies of the 70s, earning Academy Award nominations and even winning. It wasn't until the next year Tobe Hooper directed a film that changed horror and gone a little back to the Hitchcockian roots. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was regarded by many critics as one of the most violent horror films of all times, even though most of the violence was implied or off camera. In 1979, Alien was released in the theaters, and expose moviegoers to a combination of horror themes that created this horrifying, hellish atmosphere. And it was never heard of before with all these elements combined, which I will talk about right now. These themes were pretty much the haunted house, rape, body horror, cosmic horror, and isolation. All these combined together created an unforgettable sci-fi horror film that is considered one of the best in every top 100 list of best films of all times. I'm going to start here with The Haunted House. As you know, many critics, especially critics after Alien's release for many years, always called Alien a haunted house in space. And a lot of it has to do with the tagline, "In space, nobody can hear you scream." Alien had the feel of a haunted house, right out of Robert Wise's The Haunting, which came out in 1963. The Haunting was a well-shot film that established the main character, which is not the actor, but the house. The house felt like a antagonist of the film. There was no men in suits. There was no like jump scares. The Haunting's atmosphere came from the dread of how the house was shot. It was a living character, a living, breathing character, and it's pretty much the prototype of what a haunted house should be like. Alien takes these concepts of Robert Wise's The Haunting and puts them in a Nostromo, but goes beyond that, because once we're in the planet, the surface of LV-426, we're subjected to the sound design of the wailing winds of LV-426, even some lightning and the cold and the dampness. This is elements of movies like The Old Dark House, which came out like in the 30s, and which is technically not a haunted house film, but I'm gonna get to it in the isolation phase of this video essay. Now, this whole theme of a cruel, dominating mother AI was explored in George R.R. Martin's book, Night Flyers, which later became a 1987 movie and a canceled 2018 TV series, which in itself was pretty ahead of its time. Now we're taking the haunted house and putting it into space, and this became a reoccurring theme in films after Alien, like Event Horizon, which is very close to Robert Wise's The Haunting, but telegraphs it where they modeled the whole ship of the Event Horizon to that of the Notre Dame Cathedral, giving it a gothic look. Another example in Alien with the haunted house thing is them landing on LV-426 and finding the derelict spaceship. Once they go into the derelict ship, we're treated to like this biomechanic look that's almost gothic in a way, but also very alien to moviegoers, being that they've never seen these kind of designs before. The unoccupied scenes in the Nostromo are very scary and very suspenseful because there's nothing there. And it's pretty much dark, brooding, very sleek, and pretty much something out of a haunted house movie, but in space. Geiger's masterful concepts are borrowed from his Necromonicon book. Every bit of suspense and brooding leads to Kane being attacked by the facehugger. And that's what I love. The dread that we feel. I mean, the editing job in Alien, where Kane, before he goes into, puts his head on that egg, is just brilliant. And it's something out of a jump scare that you're really waiting to see. But once Kane is attacked by the facehugger that incapacitates him, this is where, we go from the haunted house or the poltergeist, like the spiritual attack or pretty much a paranormal attack to a physical. Rape was often a taboo in pre-Hays Code films. You couldn't even bring it up in a film, and often the word rape itself would pretty much be changed to attack. That was more suitable for audiences back in the Hays Code days of filmmaking. The Hays Code being censorship that was pretty much a Catholic stance on censoring films that, you know, promoted sexuality or criminal behavior. You had to have a good guy and a bad guy. You had to have resolve in a film and no nihilism during that period of studio filmmaking. It wasn't until an independent film called Johnny Belinda, 1948, where a woman who's deaf mute, she gets raped and she has the baby of a rapist, only to find him out and murder him. This was pretty revolutionary and a pivotal time in filmmaking, because now the subject of rape is now being shown in the movie theater. The Ida Lupino produced Outrage from 1956 dealt with the aftermath of rape, dealing with a woman's trauma and PTSD. Later on, sexual assault was often seen in biker films and exploitation films of the late 50s and 60s. Even in spaghetti westerns, you would see rape in there. Leave it to the Italians to put that in a cowboy film. It wasn't until John Borman's Deliverance until we saw the role reversal from a woman being the victim to the man. Deliverance was a mainstream movie that made money at the box office and was a risk coming out due to the themes of male rape. After Deliverance, the films changed now. Now we had this serious tone and this subject matter that even men can be raped. Alien took this to a whole new direction. Inspired by the eroticism of the artwork of H.R. Giger, Alien scribe Dan O'Bannon once said in a Starlog interview that they were going to attack the audience sexually. Giger's work often depicts biomechanoid eroticism, and pretty much has a lot of phallus symbols and a lot of pretty much orifices depicted in his work, making it both beautiful and disturbing. The nature of his artwork is dark, never light, and often there's a satanic theme that is part of that atmosphere that actually makes us feel repulsive and guilty for actually liking his work. That one scene in Alien where Kane gets face hugged, that's pretty much the alien's first life cycle, going from the overmorph, which is the egg, to face hugger. The face hugger, pretty much the way the design was, where it had these, Geiger pretty much wanted these fingers to wrap around its victim. And its phallus, it actually has a vagina opening with a phallus that goes in Kane's throat, forcing it in Kane's throat and incapacitating him until it dies, keeping him alive by breathing for him. The next phase is where Kane pretty much gives birth to a chest burster, which was one of the most disturbing scenes in Hollywood history. It's pretty much a scene that's painful and bloody, and one that mirrors abnormal childbirth to an exaggerated but plausible violation that is disturbing and yet scary. In another scene, Ripley gets attacked by Ash, and Ash pretty much takes this porno magazine that belongs to Parker, rolls it up, and pretty much shoves it down her throat. It was one of the most disturbing things, but a lot of people question, why would a robot choose to kill somebody in that fashion? Was he trying to awkwardly emulate a sexual act since he didn't have genitalia? A lot of people have pondered this, and just leading to the scene, the way he just snaps and does it, it was just very disturbing, and it's an intense scene that raised questions for many years. Or was he trying to emulate the sexual act of the face hugger? Only writer Dan O'Bannon could answer that, and he's dead. Now, and the closest thing we're going to see to an actual rape scene in Alien is Lambert's death. Ridley Scott went to the movie theaters with Dan O'Bannon to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to get some sort of inspiration. Ridley was never a horror fan, but enjoyed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre due to its implying things in certain scenes or not showing certain violent acts that were off screen. With Lambert's death pretty much was the same in all the drafts of the script of Alien. Never mentioned rape, but it wasn't until the actual scene played out in the movie theater where pretty much Lambert gets attacked with Parker. Parker's quickly killed, and we see this cutaway of the alien tail going between her legs, which actually was actor Harry Dean Stanton's legs, and it was a shot that wasn't used but put in Lambert's death. When Ripley runs towards Lambert and hears her screaming, we hear this wet gagging that is so disturbing and often raised questions what the alien was doing to her, instead of just killing her outright, making Lambert suffer. Female rape of an alien is far more disturbing because, as you know, the alien's life cycle, we know that the alien or the xenomorph takes its DNA from its host. So my theory would have been, you have like the xenomorph who probably took Kane's DNA, and probably Kane was probably harboring sexual thoughts. I mean, they're on a ship in space with two women, and he's harboring these sexual thoughts that got passed down to the xenomorph. And the xenomorph pretty much, and this is a theory that other people and other critics have, the xenomorph pretty much had Kane's sexual urges and tried to simulate that sexual act, but with its tail. Just the thing that, the way Lambert is killed is pretty horrific, and it's more horrific with Brett Burt's sound design. And when we see Lambert, we pretty much see her without her pants. Whether she's naked or not, we do know that she doesn't have pants, her, blood coming down her bare feet, but she had shoes on. It makes you wonder, did the alien rip her clothes? Like, these are all implied things that audience members have carried over the centuries because they weren't exactly answered. Again, Dan O'Bannon never had a rape in any of his drafts of the script, but this is something that occurred during editing, and the editing was so masterful that it implied this rape. Now, another thing that actually pushes this is, and got inspired by Alien, was a scene in Jacob's Ladder, and it made me think of this, where the character Jacob is dancing with his girlfriend. He has a fever dream and sees this demon dancing with his girlfriend, and then he sees the demon's tail go between the legs and pretty much do the sexual act on her, and makes the tail come out her mouth. When I first saw that scene, it was like 1990. I was in a movie theater, and it made me think of Alien. Did the alien do the same to Lambert? Who knows? But in my opinion, I would say yes, and this makes this film even more disturbing. Same year of Alien, Cronenberg came out with a film called The Brood in 1979, where a woman, played by Samantha Eggar, gives birth to monstrous children through hate. And it is the most disturbing film I ever saw, and it's pretty much one of the top films of body horror. Just like Alien, Alien, where it does it with from within. Uh, Cronenberg's body horror is, commenting not only on the normal childbirth but also cancer. If you want to go very early with body horror, there was this French New Wave film by Agnes Varda called Cleo 5 to 7. And they had this scene where the main character, Cleo, is having this dilemma about the fear of dying or having cancer. She thinks she's having cancer, and this is psychological thing that she carries. And there's a scene where she goes into town and sees this street performer putting live frogs in his mouth and swallowing them and regurgitating them, and she's like thinking of cancer in her body. It's one of the best edited scenes that dealt with body horror in such a way that it was just amazing. John Carpenter's The Thing is another one that deals with it and almost has this like cancer theme of a creature that replicates your cells and becomes you and then mutates you in very painful ways. The Thing is pretty revolutionary in body horror, and it's pretty much one that stays with you. In my opinion, The Thing's pretty much like a companion film to Alien in so many ways. Factoid: Carpenter turned down Alien. He was offered it by scribe Dan O'Bannon, who wanted originally Carpenter to direct the film, which would have been a remake of their film together, Dark Star. Now, cosmic horror. The writings of H.P. Lovecraft and the Mountains of Madness are very similar to Alien, where an expedition crew go to the Arctic, and they basically find a civilization past these mountains of a long dead civilization, these abandoned buildings, a civilization of people called the Elder Ones, and the Elder Ones created Shoggoth, which they used as slaves to build their civilization. And it's pretty much very similar to Alien, where in Alien they find a derelict ship, they find a dead species of alien known as the space jockey, and later the engineer. And during this time, where we don't know everything, pretty much everything in Alien was unknown to us until Prometheus came out, until we knew anything about the engineers. And like the Elder Ones, the engineers have an enemy themselves, one they created. And that is pretty much the goo that turns to the trilobite at the end of Prometheus that impregnates the engineer. The common theme of H.P. Lovecraft is how protagonists go mad from witnessing something that cannot be explained. The theme of madness is definitely there. However, it quite differs in Aliens films, because Ripley never goes mad, but is very affected mentally by the events of the Nostromo, and it's shown in Aliens with her struggling with her PTSD. Where Alien is structured but unexplained until the events of Prometheus and Covenant, and John Carpenter's The Thing is abstract, which is pretty much the purity of what H.P. Lovecraft writes. For many years we didn't know what went on that derelict ship, and sometimes I wish it was just left alone. The last element of fear is isolation. One of the true stories of horror is the Donner Party. And the Donner Party was about these settlers who made their way out west, made an ill-fated choice or a shortcut that got them pretty much snowed in, and they had to resort to cannibalism after they lost their food and pretty much all their supplies. Isolation played a factor into it. And what was the isolation? The snow and being in a wasteland. When we think of isolation in early films, we look at a film like The Old Dark House, which, where guests are trapped with a maniac in the house while there's a rainstorm. The rainstorm becomes pretty much the force that keeps them in the story. John Carpenter's The Thing, it's the Arctic. The Arctic makes it hard for them to ever escape, only for the crew of Outpost 31 to face their enemy head on. An alien, the Nostromo, which sets down in an alien world only to bring back a parasite. But it's not the alien world of LV 426 and its harsh environment and its thunder and its wind, howling wind at that. No, it's space, the black void of space that pretty much creates the isolation and alien. Just like the tagline, in space, nobody could hear you scream. So, guys, what are your thoughts on this essay? And what are your theories on Alien? Just leave them down in the comments below. Push that notification bell. And please subscribe. And with that, you guys have an awesome Alien Day. Take care, guys.